What if the thoughts running through your mind right now aren't entirely your own? What if, at this very moment, invisible streams of consciousness are flowing between minds all around the planet, carrying thoughts, emotions, and intentions from person to person without anyone realizing it's happening? What if the voice in your head that you assume is your private inner dialogue is actually receiving broadcasts from other minds, blending their thoughts with yours so seamlessly that you can't tell where your consciousness ends and theirs begins? Tonight, as you settle into the deepest layers of sleep, we're going to explore the terrifying and fascinating possibility that mind reading isn't some future technology or supernatural ability that only a few gifted individuals possess. Instead, we're going to discover that telepathic communication might already be occurring on a massive scale, right under our noses, every single moment of every single day, operating through mechanisms so subtle and pervasive that we've never noticed them before. But before we dive into this mind-bending exploration that will challenge everything you think you know about the privacy of your own thoughts, I need you to do something that could change your life forever. Right now, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because you're about to join a growing community of consciousness explorers who are discovering the most profound secrets of human existence that mainstream science has been ignoring or actively suppressing for decades. Your subscription doesn't just help this channel grow, it helps us reach other seekers who are ready to question the fundamental nature of reality itself. We're building a network of awakened minds who understand that consciousness is far more mysterious and powerful than we've been taught to believe. When you subscribe, you're not just getting access to content, you're joining a revolution in human understanding that's happening right now, in real time, as more and more people wake up to the truth about the nature of mind and reality. And here's something crucial: when tonight's journey blows your mind and challenges everything you thought you knew about the boundaries between minds, I want you to do something that will contribute to our collective understanding of these phenomena. Drop a comment below sharing your own experiences with unexplained mental connections. Have you ever known what someone was going to say before they said it? Have you ever felt someone staring at you from behind? Have you ever thought of someone just moments before they called or texted you? Your stories aren't just entertainment for other viewers, they're data points in a vast database of human consciousness experiences that might hold the keys to understanding who we really are as conscious beings. Every comment you leave, every experience you share, adds to our collective knowledge and helps other people recognize similar experiences in their own lives. Together, we're building a comprehensive map of telepathic phenomena that could revolutionize our understanding of human consciousness. For the next 2 hours, we'll uncover evidence so compelling and disturbing that you'll never again assume your mind is truly private or isolated from other minds. From cutting-edge neuroscience research that proves minds can influence each other across impossible distances, to declassified government documents revealing decades of secret research into weaponized telepathy. From the latest discoveries in quantum consciousness that suggest all minds are fundamentally connected at the deepest level of reality, to ancient wisdom traditions that have known these secrets for thousands of years. This isn't just another documentary about psychic phenomena or paranormal experiences. This is a rigorous, scientific exploration of evidence that suggests mind reading might be the most important scientific fact of our time, a fact that's been hidden from the public because acknowledging it would completely overthrow our understanding of consciousness, a privacy, individual identity, and the very nature of what it means to be human. We're going to discover that the boundaries between minds might be far more permeable than we've ever imagined. We're going to explore the possibility that what you experience as your private thoughts might actually be a constantly flowing mixture of your own mental activity and telepathic impressions from countless other minds, all blended together so seamlessly that you can't tell the difference. As you relax and allow your consciousness to expand beyond its normal boundaries, prepare to question everything you've been taught about the nature of mind and reality. The evidence we're about to explore will challenge not just your beliefs about psychic phenomena, but your fundamental assumptions about consciousness, identity, privacy, and what it means to be an individual in a world where all minds might be secretly connected. So settle in, let your analytical mind relax, and prepare for a journey that will take you to the very edges of human understanding. By the time you wake up tomorrow morning, you might see the world and your place in it in a completely different way. The revolution in consciousness isn't coming in the future. It's happening right now, and you're about to become part of it. The story begins in a highly classified laboratory at Princeton University on a cold February morning in 1979, when researcher Robert John was conducting what he thought would be a routine study on human consciousness and random number generators. Dr. John, a respected aerospace engineer who had served as dean of Princeton's School of Engineering and Applied Science, had no idea that his experiments would eventually provide some of the most compelling and disturbing scientific evidence that minds can directly influence physical reality across vast distances and, even more unsettling, can apparently read information directly from other minds without any physical connection whatsoever. The experiment was elegantly simple in its design, but revolutionary in its implications for everything we thought we knew about the relationship between mind and matter. Participants would sit in front of computer-controlled random number generators, sophisticated machines designed to produce completely random sequences of ones and zeros with absolutely no pattern or predictability. These weren't simple coin-flipping devices, but quantum-level random event generators that used radioactive decay and other truly random physical processes to ensure that their output was completely unpredictable and immune to any form of external influence. The participants were asked to attempt to influence these machines to produce more ones than zeros, or more zeros than ones, simply through focused mental intention. No physical contact with the machines was allowed. No electromagnetic or mechanical influence was possible. The experimental setup was designed to eliminate every conceivable form of conventional interaction between the human participants and the random number generators. The subjects were simply asked to think at the machines and try to influence their output through the power of consciousness alone. According to everything we thought we knew about the nature of mind and matter, this should have been completely impossible. Random number generators are carefully designed and extensively tested to be immune to any form of external influence. They use quantum-level processes that should be completely isolated from any macroscopic effects, including human consciousness. The idea that thoughts could influence these machines was considered so absurd by mainstream scientists that most wouldn't even consider testing it seriously, dismissing it as pseudoscience without investigation. But what Dr. John discovered over the next 28 years of rigorous, meticulously controlled experiments involving millions upon millions of trials would shake the foundations of materialist science to its very core. Not only could participants influence the random number generators through focused intention, and the effect was small but statistically undeniable across millions of trials, but the most successful participants seemed to be unconsciously reading information about what the machines were going to do before they actually did it. The participants weren't just influencing the future output of the machines through some form of psychokinetic effect. They were somehow accessing information about future random events that hadn't occurred yet and wouldn't occur for minutes or even hours. This suggested that consciousness could not only influence physical reality, but could also transcend the normal flow of time to access information about events that existed only as quantum possibilities in the future. The even more disturbing and inexplicable from the perspective of conventional physics, Dr. John found that some participants could influence random number generators that were located thousands of miles away, in different buildings, sometimes even on different continents. The distance between the person and the machine made absolutely no difference to the effect. It was as if consciousness could reach out across space instantaneously and directly interact with physical systems anywhere in the universe, completely ignoring the supposed limitations of the speed of light and the fundamental isolation of physical objects from each other. The implications were staggering. If consciousness could influence random physical processes across unlimited distances without any time delay, then the basic assumptions of physics about the separation of objects in space and time might be fundamentally incorrect. Reality might be far more interconnected and consciousness responsive than anyone had previously imagined. But the most unsettling discovery of all came when Dr. John began studying what happened when pairs of participants worked together on the experiments. When two people focused their intentions on the same random number generator simultaneously, the effects weren't just additive, they were often exponentially more powerful, sometimes 10 or even 20 times stronger than what either person could achieve alone. It was as if the minds were somehow linking together, creating a unified field of consciousness that was far more powerful than individual minds working in isolation. This suggested that consciousness might not be confined to individual brains, but might operate as a field phenomenon that could be shared and amplified when multiple minds focused on the same target. The boundaries between individual minds might be far more permeable than anyone had previously suspected, with consciousness able to merge and combine in ways that created emergent properties that transcended the capabilities of isolated individual awareness. Dr. John's research team documented thousands of experimental sessions showing these paired mind effects, with statistical significance so high that the probability of the results occurring by chance was less than 1 in billions. The evidence was undeniable, but the implications were so revolutionary that most mainstream scientists refused to acknowledge the findings, preferring to ignore evidence that challenged their fundamental worldview rather than confront the possibility that consciousness might be far more powerful and mysterious than they had assumed. The Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory, as Dr. John's program came to be known, operated for nearly 3 decades, producing a massive database of experimental evidence showing that consciousness could influence physical reality in measurable ways. The research was conducted with the highest standards of scientific rigor, using sophisticated statistical analysis, blind experimental protocols, and replication by independent researchers around the world. Yet despite the overwhelming evidence, the scientific establishment largely ignored or dismissed Dr. John's findings, demonstrating the power of scientific paradigms to resist evidence that doesn't fit established beliefs. The resistance to acknowledging consciousness, matter interactions revealed how deeply committed mainstream science was to a materialist worldview that assumed consciousness was nothing more than a byproduct of brain activity, with no causal power over physical reality. As you drift deeper into relaxation, your own consciousness already beginning to expand beyond its normal boundaries. Consider what these experiments might reveal about the nature of your own mind. If consciousness can influence random systems across vast distances, and if multiple minds can link together to create exponentially more powerful effects, what does this suggest about the boundaries between your thoughts and the thoughts of others? What if the privacy you assume exists around your mental experience is actually a complete illusion, and your mind is constantly connected to and influenced by every other mind on the planet through mechanisms that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness? Around the same time that Dr. John was conducting his groundbreaking experiments at Princeton, thousands of miles away in the mountains of California, the researchers at the Stanford Research Institute were conducting even more disturbing experiments that would eventually be declassified and revealed to the public decades later, providing undeniable evidence that human consciousness can access information that is supposedly completely hidden and protected by any conceivable physical barrier or security measure. These experiments, funded by the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and other government agencies with virtually unlimited budgets and access to the most sophisticated technology available, were designed to test whether human consciousness could be weaponized for intelligence-gathering purposes. The United States government had become concerned that the Soviet Union was developing psychic warfare capabilities, and American intelligence agencies wanted to determine whether telepathic espionage was possible, and if so, how it could be developed and deployed for national security purposes. The program, which came to be known as remote viewing, involved training individuals to psychically perceive distant locations, objects, or events without using their normal senses, and then using these abilities to spy on enemy installations, locate missing persons, track the movements of foreign leaders, and gather intelligence that was impossible to obtain through conventional surveillance methods. The remote viewers were given only geographic coordinates or abstract reference numbers, and they were asked to describe what they could perceive at those locations, often thousands of miles away and behind layers of physical security. Dr. Russell Targ, one of the lead researchers in the program and a laser physicist with impeccable scientific credentials, documented over 20 years of experiments, showing that trained remote viewers could accurately describe target locations with statistical precision far beyond what chance would predict. They could describe the layout of buildings they had never seen, identify objects that were hidden in sealed containers in different buildings, perceive events that were happening in real time at distant locations on the other side of the planet, and even access information about future events that hadn't occurred yet. The remote viewing protocols were designed with the most rigorous scientific controls to eliminate any possibility of fraud, sensory leakage, or conventional information gathering. The viewers were isolated from any possible sources of information about their targets. They had no contact with the people who selected the targets. They were given only abstract numerical coordinates that provided no clues about the nature or location of what they were supposed to perceive. The targets were selected using random number generators to eliminate any possibility of unconscious cueing or pattern recognition. Under these strictly controlled conditions, the remote viewers consistently demonstrated abilities that defied every known principle of physics and neuroscience. They could describe the interiors of buildings they had never visited, located on continents they had never traveled to, containing objects and activities they had no way of knowing about through any conventional means. The accuracy of their descriptions was verified through independent investigation, satellite imagery, and on-site inspection by intelligence operatives. But what made the remote viewing experiments truly disturbing and revolutionary was the discovery that the viewers weren't just perceiving distant locations. They were somehow accessing the thoughts and intentions of the people at those locations. Remote viewers would often describe not just the physical features of a target site, but the emotions, thoughts, plans, and secret intentions of the people who were there. They were reading minds across impossible distances, accessing information that existed only in the private thoughts of others, information that no physical technology could possibly detect or intercept. One of the most documented and thoroughly verified cases involved remote viewer Pat Price, a former police commissioner who had demonstrated remarkable psychic abilities in locating missing persons and solving crimes that conventional investigation methods had failed to resolve. Price had worked with police departments across the country, using his psychic abilities to find kidnapping victims, locate evidence in criminal cases, and provide information that led to the capture of dangerous criminals. His track record was so impressive that when the CIA learned of his abilities, they recruited him for the most sensitive remote viewing operations. In one particularly significant experiment, Price was asked to describe a Soviet research facility based only on its geographic coordinates numbers that corresponded to a location he had never visited and never heard of, and had no possible way of knowing anything about through conventional means. The target was a highly classified nuclear research installation in the Soviet Union, surrounded by multiple layers of security and completely hidden from outside observation. Price not only accurately described the physical layout of the secret facility in extraordinary detail, including the specific configuration of buildings, the colors of various structures, the arrangement of security installations, and the underground tunnel systems that connected different parts of the complex, but also provided detailed information about the classified research being conducted there. He described specific experiments involving nuclear materials, identified the types of equipment being used, and even provided technical details about research procedures that were known only to the scientists working on the projects. Most remarkably, the Price provided information about the names of key personnel, including individuals whose involvement in the facility was unknown even to most people working there. And he described the specific thoughts and concerns of the facility's director regarding security breaches, personnel issues, and technical problems with ongoing research projects. He accurately described conversations that had taken place in closed meetings, reported on the director's private concerns about potential espionage, and even provided details about personal relationships among the scientific staff. When this information was later verified through other intelligence sources, satellite imagery, and eventually through human intelligence assets who had gained access to the facility, it was found to be remarkably accurate in every detail. Price had provided information that included technical specifications that weren't even known to American intelligence agencies at the time, the personal details about individuals that had never been reported in any intelligence briefing, and insights into the facility's operations that proved to have strategic intelligence value. The implications were staggering and terrifying from a national security perspective. If remote viewers could access not just visual information about distant locations, but also the mental contents of people at those locations, it suggested that no secrets were truly safe from psychic espionage. The most secure facilities, the most classified information, and the most private thoughts of enemy leaders could potentially be accessed by trained remote viewers working for hostile nations. But the implications went far beyond national security concerns. If remote viewing worked as documented, it suggested that all minds might be connected through some kind of invisible network that transcends the limitations of space and time, and that this network could be accessed and exploited by individuals with the right training and abilities. The boundaries between individual minds, which form the foundation of concepts like privacy, individual rights, and personal autonomy, might be far more permeable than anyone had previously imagined. The remote viewing program continued for over 20 years, producing thousands of documented cases where psychic perception provided accurate intelligence information that was impossible to obtain through conventional means. The program's existence was kept secret until the 1990s, though when budget pressures and changing political priorities led to its declassification and public disclosure. Even then, many of the most sensitive cases and the most successful remote viewers remained classified, with their identities and achievements hidden to protect national security interests. The declassified documents revealed that remote viewing had been used to locate hostages, track the movements of enemy forces, monitor nuclear weapons programs, and gather intelligence on a wide range of targets around the world. The success rate was high enough that the program continued to receive funding for decades. Despite skepticism from conventional intelligence analysts who couldn't understand how psychic methods could produce reliable results. Let yourself drift even deeper as we explore what this invisible mental network might actually be, and why its existence changes everything we thought we knew about the nature of consciousness, privacy, and individual identity. A modern neuroscience has made remarkable discoveries about how the brain works at the cellular and molecular level, the mapping neural pathways with extraordinary precision and identifying specific brain regions responsible for different cognitive functions. Yet despite decades of intensive research and billions of dollars in funding, there's still no scientific explanation for how individual neurons, which are essentially biological switches that turn on and off in response to chemical and electrical signals, somehow create the rich, subjective experience of consciousness with all its complexity, creativity, and apparent unity. The hard problem of consciousness, as philosopher David Chalmers calls it, remains completely unsolved despite the enormous advances in neuroscience technology and methodology. We can map every neuron in the brain, trace every electrical impulse with millisecond precision, analyze every chemical reaction at the molecular level, and monitor brain activity in real time using the most sophisticated imaging equipment ever developed. But we still have absolutely no idea how these physical processes create the inner experience of being conscious, of having thoughts and feelings and a sense of self that experiences the world from a unique first-person perspective. The gap between objective physical processes in the brain and subjective conscious experience seems unbridgeable using current scientific paradigms. No amount of detailed knowledge about neurons, neurotransmitters, and brain circuits has brought us any closer to understanding how physical matter gives rise to subjective experience, how unconscious matter becomes conscious awareness, or how separate neural processes create the unified field of consciousness that we experience as our inner mental life. But what if the reason consciousness is so difficult to explain is because we've been looking for it in the wrong place entirely? What if consciousness isn't produced by individual brains at all, but is instead a field that exists throughout the universe? And individual brains are more like receivers or tuning devices that focus and filter this universal consciousness field into individual streams of experience, similar to how radio receivers tune into different frequencies of electromagnetic radiation that exists everywhere in the environment. Dr. Amit Goswami, a theoretical physicist who spent decades studying the relationship between quantum mechanics and consciousness before leaving his tenured position at the University of Oregon to pursue this research full-time, proposes exactly this revolutionary possibility according to Dr. Goswami's theory. the which he has developed through rigorous mathematical analysis and experimental testing. Consciousness is the fundamental ground of all being. And what we call physical reality is actually consciousness manifesting as matter, energy, space, and time through processes that we're only beginning to understand. From this perspective, consciousness isn't an emergent property of complex matter, as materialist science assumes, but rather matter is an emergent property of consciousness. The universe doesn't consist of unconscious matter that somehow gives rise to consciousness through increasing complexity, but rather consists of consciousness that manifests as apparently material forms through processes of observation, measurement, and interaction that collapse quantum possibilities into classical reality. Individual brains, from this perspective, that don't create consciousness any more than radio receivers create the radio waves they detect. Instead, the brains focus and filter the universal consciousness field into individual streams of experience, creating the illusion of separate minds while actually being different aspects of the same underlying consciousness. Each brain would be like a unique lens that focuses universal consciousness in a particular way, creating the appearance of individual identity, while actually being expressions of the same fundamental awareness. The boundaries between individual minds would be artificial constructs created by the filtering and focusing mechanisms of individual brains, but the underlying consciousness would be seamlessly connected everywhere, like an ocean appearing to be divided into separate waves, while actually being one continuous body of water. What we experience as individual thoughts, emotions, and perceptions would be local modifications of the universal consciousness field, created by the specific filtering characteristics of our individual brains, but ultimately connected to and influenced by the consciousness activity of every other aware being in the universe. If Dr. Goswami's theory is correct and the evidence from remote viewing, telepathy research, quantum consciousness experiments, and consciousness field studies strongly supports it, then mind reading wouldn't be a special ability that some people have and others don't. It would be a natural consequence of the fact that all minds are actually aspects of the same universal consciousness, and the apparent separation between minds is just an illusion created by our limited perspective and inadequate understanding of how consciousness actually works. This would explain why remote viewing works regardless of distance, time, or physical barriers. If consciousness exists as a universal field that isn't constrained by space and time, then accessing information from distant locations, or even future events, would be as natural as accessing information from your own memories. The perceived separation between minds would be an illusion created by the brain's filtering mechanisms, but the actual separation wouldn't exist at the level of consciousness itself. The universal consciousness field theory also explains why telepathic abilities seem to be enhanced during altered states of consciousness, such as meditation, dreams, and deep relaxation. These states might temporarily reduce the brain's filtering activity, allowing greater access to the universal consciousness field and the information it contains. When the normal boundaries created by analytical thinking and self-conscious monitoring are relaxed, the natural interconnection between minds becomes more apparent and accessible. This model suggests that developing telepathic abilities isn't about gaining new powers, but about removing the barriers that prevent us from accessing our natural connection to universal consciousness. The abilities aren't supernatural additions to normal human capacity, but rather the recovery of natural capacities that have been obscured by conditioning, limiting beliefs, and over-reliance on analytical thinking modes that emphasize separation and individual identity rather than connection and unity. The implications of universal consciousness field theory extend far beyond individual telepathic abilities to encompass the entire nature of reality, identity, and human potential. If all minds are aspects of universal consciousness, then the development of humanity toward greater telepathic sensitivity and collective awareness might represent a natural evolutionary progression toward recognizing our true nature as interconnected expressions of cosmic consciousness. The evidence for this universal consciousness field is accumulating from multiple areas of research, creating a convergent body of scientific knowledge that is impossible to ignore or dismiss. Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences has conducted hundreds of meticulously controlled experiments demonstrating what he calls field consciousness effects, situations where the consciousness of one person can directly influence the physiology and behavior of other people. even when they're in completely separate locations with no sensory contact and no possible way of influencing each other through conventional physical means. In Dr. Radin's experiments, which have been replicated by independent researchers around the world with remarkably consistent results, when one person looks at emotionally evocative images, photographs that produce strong emotional responses such as erotic images, violent scenes, beautiful landscapes, or pictures of loved ones, other people in distant locations show corresponding changes in their skin conductance, heart rate, brain activity, and other physiological measures, even though they have no way of knowing what the first person is experiencing and no conscious awareness that anything unusual is happening. The experimental protocol is designed to eliminate every possible form of conventional communication or influence between the participants. The people are in separate buildings, sometimes miles apart, with no visual, auditory, or other sensory contact. They have no knowledge of when the experiments are taking place or what the other person might be experiencing. The timing of the image presentations is controlled by random number generators to prevent any possibility of unconscious cueing or expectation effects. Under these rigorously controlled conditions, the physiological responses occur with statistical significance that proves they're not due to chance or coincidence. The effect occurs instantaneously, regardless of the distance between the people, suggesting that consciousness operates outside the normal constraints of space and time. The strength of the physiological response in the distant person often correlates with the intensity of the emotional response in the person viewing the images, indicating that the connection involves real information transfer rather than random coincidental responses. Even more intriguingly, Dr. Radin has found that these consciousness field effects become stronger when people are emotionally connected to each other through love, friendship, family bonds, or even temporary connections created through shared meditation or focused attention. Pairs of people who are romantically involved show much stronger telepathic links than randomly selected individuals. The physiological responses are more pronounced, more consistent, and more closely correlated with the emotional content of the triggering stimuli. Family members, especially mothers and children, show remarkably strong consciousness connections that can be detected and measured in laboratory settings, even when they're separated by considerable distances. The bond between mothers and their children appears to create particularly robust telepathic channels that allow emotional and physiological information to flow between them with remarkable fidelity and consistency. Even strangers who spend time focusing on their connection and developing empathy for each other show enhanced telepathic communication abilities, compared to control groups who have no special preparation or connection. This suggests that consciousness connections can be strengthened through intention, attention, and emotional bonding, and that telepathic abilities might be developed through practices that enhance empathy and interpersonal connection. The emotional enhancement of consciousness field effects suggests that emotional bonds might actually strengthen the connections between minds at the level of the universal consciousness field, creating more direct channels for information transfer and mutual influence. When you feel love, affection, or deep care for another person, you might be creating a more direct channel between your consciousness and theirs, making mind reading more likely, more accurate, and more emotionally rich and meaningful. This emotional amplification of telepathic connections has profound implications for understanding human relationships and social bonding. The deep connections we feel with loved ones might not be just psychological or emotional phenomena, but might reflect actual energetic and informational links that operate through consciousness field mechanisms. When we say we feel connected to someone, we might be describing a literal connection that exists at the level of consciousness and can be detected through scientific measurement. Dr. Radin's research also reveals that consciousness field effects operate in both directions, with each person's consciousness influencing the other's physiological and mental state. This bidirectional influence creates feedback loops, where the emotional and physiological states of connected individuals become synchronized over time, leading to shared moods, synchronized biorhythms, and coordinated behavioral patterns that enhance cooperation and mutual understanding. The synchronization effects become particularly pronounced during activities that require close coordination and cooperation, such as musical performance, athletic teamwork, and collaborative creative projects. Musicians playing together often report feeling merged with their fellow performers. The athletes describe being en sync with their teammates. And creative collaborators frequently experience shared inspiration and synchronized insights that seem to come from a collective rather than individual source. These experiences of consciousness synchronization and merger might reflect temporary dissolutions of the normal boundaries between individual minds, allowing access to shared consciousness states that transcend individual limitations and create emergent capabilities that exceed what any individual could achieve alone. The consciousness field effects documented by Dr. Radin provide scientific evidence that these experiential reports of consciousness merger and synchronization have a measurable physiological basis. The implications extend beyond individual relationships to collective human activities and social phenomena. Large groups of people engaged in synchronized activities such as religious services, political rallies, musical concerts, and sporting events often report feeling merged into a collective consciousness that transcends individual awareness. But these reports might reflect actual consciousness field effects operating on a collective scale, creating shared awareness states that influence the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors of everyone in the group. The reality of mind reading becomes even more compelling and undeniable when we examine what happens during crisis situations, when the normal barriers between consciousness seem to dissolve under the pressure of extreme emotion and urgent need. Throughout history, there have been countless documented cases of people receiving telepathic impressions about loved ones who were in danger, often across vast distances and without any normal means of communication. And these cases have been studied and verified by researchers who have found patterns that suggest genuine telepathic communication rather than coincidence, imagination, or wishful thinking. Dr. Louisa Rhine, who studied spontaneous psychic experiences for over 40 years and collected one of the largest databases of documented telepathic experiences in existence. They analyzed thousands of cases where people reported receiving telepathic information about crisis situations involving people they cared about. Her research revealed consistent patterns that occur far too often to be explained by chance. The telepathic information is usually received during altered states of consciousness, such as dreams, meditation, or deep relaxation. The information is most often about people to whom the receiver has strong emotional bonds. The accuracy of the information can be verified through independent sources, and the timing of the telepathic reception often corresponds exactly with the timing of the crisis event itself. Dr. Rhine's methodology was rigorous and scientific, involving detailed interviews with witnesses, verification of facts through independent investigation, statistical analysis of patterns and correlations, and careful documentation of all relevant circumstances. She excluded cases that could be explained by coincidence, prior knowledge, sensory cues, or other conventional factors, focusing only on experiences that appeared to involve genuine telepathic information transfer. One of the most compelling and thoroughly documented cases from Dr. Rhine's collection involved a mother in California who woke up in the middle of the night with an overwhelming sense that her son, who was serving in the military in Vietnam, was in terrible danger. The impression was so strong and specific that she could visualize him trapped in a collapsed building, calling for help, surrounded by debris and smoke, with other soldiers also trapped nearby. She could feel his fear, his physical pain from injuries to his leg and shoulder, and his desperate hope that someone would find him before it was too late. The experience was so vivid and disturbing that she immediately wrote down all the details in her journal, including the exact date and time, the specific images she had seen, the emotions she had felt, and even details about the building structure, the nature of his injuries, the positions of other trapped soldiers, and the sounds of distant explosions. She was so convinced that something terrible had happened to her son that she contacted the military authorities, but was told that there had been no reported incidents involving her son's unit and that he was presumed to be safe and unharmed. The military officials assured her that her fears were unfounded and that her son's unit was in a safe area far from any combat activity. They suggested that her anxiety was natural for a mother with a son in a war zone, but that she shouldn't worry because there was no reason to believe her son was in any danger. She was told to wait for his regular scheduled communication, which wasn't due for another 2 weeks. 3 weeks later, she received word that her son had indeed been trapped in a building that collapsed during an enemy attack, at exactly the time she had experienced her vision. He had been calling for help for several hours before being rescued, and the physical details of his situation, the collapsed building, the debris, the smoke, the other trapped soldiers, and even his specific injuries to his leg and shoulder, matched her telepathic impression with remarkable accuracy down to minute details that she couldn't possibly have guessed or imagined. Most significantly, when her son was finally able to communicate with her after his rescue and recovery, he confirmed that during the time he was trapped, he had been thinking intensely about his mother and hoping desperately that somehow she would know he was in trouble and that he needed help. He had been focusing all his mental energy on trying to communicate with her, calling out to her mentally even though he knew she was thousands of miles away and had no way of hearing him through normal means. Radin documented hundreds of similar cases involving people who received accurate telepathic information about loved ones during crisis situations. Parents who knew instantly when their children were injured in accidents hundreds of miles away, the waking up at the exact moment of the accident with detailed knowledge of what had happened. Spouses who felt sudden, inexplicable anxiety at the precise time their partners were experiencing heart attacks in distant locations, often receiving specific information about symptoms and circumstances that proved to be accurate. Siblings who felt compelled to contact each other at the exact moment one of them was facing a life-threatening emergency, even though they hadn't been in contact for months and had no reason to think about each other at that particular time. The information often included specific details about locations, circumstances, physical injuries, medical procedures, and even the emotional states of the people involved, details that were later verified to be accurate through independent investigation by medical personnel, police officers, and other official sources. What makes these crisis telepathy cases particularly significant is that they seem to occur spontaneously, without any training, conscious intention, or belief in psychic abilities on the part of the people involved. Many of the individuals who reported these experiences were skeptical about telepathy and psychic phenomena before their own undeniable experiences convinced them that mind reading was real and that consciousness could transcend the apparent limitations of space and time when motivated by love and urgent need. The spontaneous nature of crisis telepathy suggests that the ability isn't limited to specially gifted individuals or trained psychics, but is actually a natural human capacity that emerges automatically under the right conditions. The combination of strong emotional bonds, life-threatening danger, and intense focus seems to activate telepathic communication channels that normally remain dormant or below the threshold of conscious awareness. The Radin's research also revealed that crisis telepathy often involves not just the transmission of factual information, but also the sharing of emotional and physical sensations between the connected individuals. Receivers often report feeling the physical pain, emotional distress, and even specific sensory experiences of the person in crisis, as if they were temporarily sharing the same consciousness and experiencing the emergency situation from inside the other person's awareness. This suggests that telepathic communication during crisis situations might involve more than simple information transfer, but might actually include temporary merging or overlap of consciousness fields that allows direct sharing of subjective experience. The boundaries between individual minds might become permeable during crisis situations, allowing consciousness to flow between connected individuals in ways that create shared awareness and mutual support, even across vast physical distances. This raises the disturbing possibility that mind reading might be happening far more often than we realize. But most of the time we simply don't notice it, or we dismiss it as intuition, coincidence, imagination, or wishful thinking. If consciousness truly exists as a universal field that connects all minds, then telepathic information might be flowing between people constantly, like background radio signals that we've learned to ignore because we don't know how to consciously tune in and decode the messages that are constantly being transmitted and received. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, a biologist who has studied consciousness and morphic fields for over 30 years and whose research has been published in the most prestigious scientific journals despite fierce opposition from materialist scientists who refuse to acknowledge phenomena that don't fit their worldview, has conducted extensive research on what he calls the sense of being stared at, the common experience of feeling when someone is looking at you from behind, even when you have no sensory way of knowing that you're being observed. His experiments, which have been replicated by researchers around the world with remarkably consistent results, involve one person looking at another person from behind, while the target person tries to sense when they're being watched. The experimental protocol is designed to eliminate all possible sensory cues that might allow the target person to know they're being observed. The starer is positioned where they cannot be seen, heard, or detected through any normal sensory mechanism, and the timing of the staring periods is controlled by random selection to prevent unconscious pattern recognition. The results show success rates significantly above chance, proving that people can indeed sense when they're being stared at, even when they have no visual, auditory, or other sensory way of knowing that someone is looking at them. The effect works even when the target person is watched through windows, mirrors, or even closed-circuit television systems, ruling out any possible conventional sensory explanation. The statistical significance of the results is so high that the probability of achieving them by chance is less than 1 in millions. What's particularly intriguing about Dr. Sheldrake's research is that the sense of being stared at seems to work through the same mechanisms as other forms of telepathy and consciousness connection. The effect is stronger when the people involved are emotionally connected to each other, and it operates instantaneously regardless of distance, just like other documented telepathic phenomena. This suggests that the sense of being stared at might be just one manifestation of a more general telepathic ability that allows minds to read information from other minds and to sense when other minds are focused on them. The staring effect also demonstrates that attention itself might have measurable effects that can be detected by the target of that attention. When someone focuses their attention on you, even without your conscious knowledge, some part of your consciousness apparently detects that focused attention and responds to it. This suggests that attention might be more than just a subjective mental state, but might actually involve the projection of some form of energy or information that can be detected and decoded by other consciousness systems. If you can sense when someone is staring at you, what other mental information might you be unconsciously receiving from the people around you every single moment of every single day? What if you're constantly picking up telepathic impressions of other people's thoughts, emotions, intentions, and attention, but you've learned to interpret these impressions as your own intuition, mood changes, or random thoughts because you've been conditioned to believe that mind reading is impossible? This possibility is supported by groundbreaking research on what neuroscientists call mirror neurons, specialized brain cells that fire not only when you perform an action or experience an emotion, but also when you observe someone else performing the same action or experiencing the same emotion. The mirror neurons seem to create a direct neural link between your brain and the brains of people you're observing, allowing you to automatically understand and even feel what others are experiencing by creating neural copies of their mental states in your own brain. Dr. Marco Iacoboni at UCLA, one of the leading researchers in mirror neuron systems, has found that these neural mirroring mechanisms are much more extensive and sophisticated than originally thought when mirror neurons were first discovered in the 1990s. They don't just mirror simple physical actions like reaching for objects or making facial expressions, but also complex emotions, intentions, abstract thoughts, and even unconscious mental processes that the observed person might not be consciously aware of themselves. When you're in the presence of another person, your mirror neuron systems are constantly creating neural copies of their mental states in your own brain, allowing you to understand what they're thinking and feeling from the inside, as if you were experiencing their thoughts and emotions directly. This neural mirroring happens automatically and unconsciously, below the threshold of awareness, but it might be the neurological basis for telepathic communication and mind-reading abilities. The mirror neuron system operates so automatically and seamlessly that you might not even notice when you're experiencing neural copies of other people's mental states. You might assume that all the thoughts and emotions flowing through your consciousness originate from your own mind, when actually many of them might be neural reflections of the mental activity of people around you, processed through your mirror neuron systems and integrated into your stream of consciousness as if they were your own experiences. This mirror neuron activity might be the mechanism by which telepathic information is processed and integrated into conscious experience. If your brain is automatically creating neural copies of other people's mental states, and if consciousness exists as a universal field that connects all minds, then your mirror neuron systems might be picking up telepathic information about what others are thinking and feeling, and then recreating those mental states in your own consciousness so accurately that you experience them as if they were your own thoughts and emotions. From this perspective, mind reading wouldn't require any special psychic abilities or supernatural powers. It would be a natural consequence of how brains are designed to function in the universal consciousness field, using sophisticated neural mirroring systems that everyone possesses but few people understand or use consciously. Every human brain would be equipped with telepathic receiving and transmitting systems in the form of mirror neuron networks. But most people would be unaware of how these systems operate, and would experience telepathic information as their own thoughts and feelings, rather than recognizing it as communication from other minds. The possibility that mind reading is already happening becomes even more compelling and revolutionary when we examine the research on what scientists call morphic resonance, a phenomenon that might explain not only how telepathic communication works, but also how individual minds contribute to and draw from a collective memory and intelligence system that includes all conscious beings who have ever lived throughout the history of the universe. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake proposes that when any pattern of activity occurs anywhere in the universe, whether it's the formation of crystals, the behavior of animals, the growth of plants, the development of embryos, or the thoughts and experiences of conscious beings, it creates a morphic field that makes similar patterns more likely to occur elsewhere. These morphic fields operate beyond the constraints of space and time, allowing information to be shared instantaneously across any distance and even across different time periods, creating a kind of cosmic memory system that preserves and transmits the experiences of all beings throughout the history of the universe. The theory of morphic resonance suggests that the universe itself has a memory, encoded in morphic fields that preserve information about every pattern of organization and activity that has ever occurred. When similar patterns emerge, they automatically resonate with and draw information from the morphic fields created by previous similar patterns, making them more likely to develop in similar ways and allowing information to be transmitted across space and time without any physical carrier or communication medium. If morphic fields exist as Sheldrake suggests, and the evidence from his experiments and those of other researchers strongly supports this possibility, then every thought you think, every emotion you feel, and every intention you hold would be contributing to morphic fields that make similar thoughts, emotions, and intentions more likely to arise in other minds, both now and in the future. Your mental activity wouldn't be private and isolated, but would be constantly contributing to and drawing from a vast library of morphic fields, created by all the minds that have ever existed throughout the history of consciousness. This would mean that mind reading is not only possible, but inevitable and constant. Every time you have a thought, you would be both accessing morphic fields created by other minds that have had similar thoughts, and simultaneously contributing to the morphic field that makes those thoughts more likely to arise in future minds. The boundary between your thoughts and other people's thoughts would be completely illusory, created by the limited perspective of individual identity, but having no basis in the actual mechanics of how consciousness operates. The morphic resonance model explains many puzzling phenomena that conventional science struggles to account for. The simultaneous discovery of the same scientific principles by different researchers in different locations, the spontaneous emergence of similar cultural innovations in isolated societies, the rapid spread of learned behaviors through animal populations, and the increasing ease of learning skills that many people have already mastered. All of these phenomena become comprehensible if morphic fields are constantly sharing information between similar systems across space and time. Dr. Sheldrake has conducted experiments that provide compelling evidence for morphic fields affecting human consciousness and behavior. In his research on what he calls telephone telepathy, he has people guess who is calling them before they answer the phone. When the caller is selected randomly from a list of potential callers, and the recipient has no way of knowing who might be calling. The experimental protocol eliminates all possible conventional cues that might allow the recipient to identify the caller using random selection, isolation from potential information sources, and statistical analysis to verify the results. The results consistently show success rates far above chance, with some participants achieving accuracy levels that would occur by chance less than once in millions of trials. The effect is strongest when the caller and receiver are emotionally connected to each other, but it occurs even between strangers, thus suggesting that some level of morphic resonance operates between all human minds regardless of their personal relationships or prior contact. But what's most significant about the telephone telepathy experiments is that the success rate has been increasing over time as more people participate in the experiments and become aware of the phenomenon. As more people become conscious of telephone telepathy and practice the ability, the morphic field for this type of telepathic communication seems to be getting stronger, making the ability more accessible to new participants who have never tried it before. This suggests that telepathic abilities might be contagious through morphic resonance. As more people develop and use these abilities, they become easier for others to access and express. The morphic fields created by successful telepathic communication make it easier for other minds to achieve similar states and abilities, creating a positive feedback loop that accelerates the development of telepathic capabilities throughout the human population. If morphic resonance is real, and the accumulating evidence suggests that it is, then the growing interest in consciousness research, telepathy, and in psychic phenomena over the past few decades might be creating morphic fields that are making these abilities more widespread and accessible throughout the human population. The more people who believe in and practice mind reading, the stronger the morphic fields become, and the more natural these abilities become for everyone, including people who have never consciously tried to develop telepathic skills. This could explain why reports of telepathic experiences, synchronicities, and psychic phenomena seem to be increasing dramatically in recent decades, especially among younger generations who have grown up with global communication technologies that might be preparing their consciousness for direct telepathic communication. It might not be that people are becoming more sensitive or that telepathy is a new phenomenon, but rather that the morphic fields for telepathic communication are becoming stronger and more accessible as more people acknowledge and work with these abilities. The morphic resonance model also suggests that the thoughts and experiences of every person who has ever lived continue to exist in the morphic fields, creating an eternal library of human consciousness that can potentially be accessed by sufficiently sensitive individuals. The wisdom, knowledge, and experiences of great thinkers, artists, and spiritual teachers throughout history might remain available through morphic resonance, allowing contemporary minds to tap into the accumulated wisdom of humanity. This could explain the phenomenon of inspiration and creative breakthrough, where individuals suddenly receive insights or creative works that seem to come from beyond their personal knowledge and experience. Artists, writers, inventors, and scientists often report that their greatest works came to them fully formed, as if they were receiving rather than creating the material. If morphic fields preserve the creative patterns of previous minds, then creative individuals might be accessing and building upon the morphic resonance of earlier creative work. The morphic field model suggests that human consciousness exists within a vast network of information and influence that connects all minds across space and time. Every thought contributes to this network, and every mind has potential access to the accumulated wisdom and experience of all consciousness that has ever existed. Mind reading, from this perspective, would be simply the conscious recognition and utilization of information flows that are already constant and universal. This ocean metaphor becomes even more relevant and scientifically grounded when we consider the research on what scientists call quantum entanglement and its possible relationship to consciousness and telepathic communication. Quantum entanglement is a phenomenon that Einstein called spooky action at a distance, because it involves two particles becoming connected in such a way that changing the state of one particle instantaneously affects the state of the other particle, regardless of the distance between them, and without any apparent physical signal passing between them through space. The phenomenon of quantum entanglement has been demonstrated countless times in laboratory experiments using photons, electrons, atoms, and even larger molecular systems. and is now the basis for emerging technologies like quantum computing, quantum cryptography, and quantum communication systems. What makes it relevant to our exploration of mind reading is that the connection between entangled particles is instantaneous. It operates across any distance without diminishing in strength, and suggests that at the quantum level, the reality is fundamentally interconnected in ways that transcend our normal understanding of space-time and the separation between objects. When two particles become quantum entangled, they essentially become parts of a single quantum system, even when separated by vast distances. The measuring or changing one particle immediately affects the other, with the correlation between their states being stronger than any classical physics theory can explain. The connection appears to operate outside the normal flow of time and the constraints of the speed of light, suggesting that quantum entangled systems exist in a realm where the normal rules of space and time don't apply. Dr. Stuart Hameroff at the University of Arizona, working in collaboration with renowned physicist Sir Roger Penrose, has proposed that consciousness itself might operate through quantum entanglement effects occurring in the microtubules of brain neurons. According to their theory, consciousness emerges from quantum processes that occur in the protein structures within neurons. Quantum processes that are capable of maintaining quantum coherence and entanglement even in the warm, noisy environment of living tissue. The Hameroff-Penrose theory suggests that the microtubules in neurons function as quantum processing systems, maintaining quantum superposition and entanglement states that allow consciousness to operate according to quantum mechanical principles rather than classical physics. If consciousness operates quantum mechanically, then it might be subject to the same non-local connections that characterize quantum entanglement, allowing conscious minds to be directly connected to each other at the quantum level. If consciousness is indeed a quantum phenomenon, as Hameroff and Penrose suggest, then it might be subject to the same non-local connections that characterize quantum entanglement. This would mean that conscious minds could be directly connected to each other at the quantum level, allowing for instantaneous information transfer that transcends the limitations of space and time and operates through mechanisms that are fundamentally different from any form of physical communication. The quantum consciousness theory would explain many of the puzzling features of telepathic phenomena that have been documented by researchers around the world. It would explain why telepathy works instantaneously across any distance, why emotional connections seem to strengthen telepathic links between minds, why telepathic abilities seem to be enhanced during altered states of consciousness when quantum effects in the brain might be more prominent, and why telepathic information often comes in the form of direct knowing or feeling rather than through sensory experiences. Dr. Henry Stapp, a physicist at Berkeley who has studied the relationship between quantum mechanics and consciousness for over 40 years, proposes that consciousness and quantum mechanics are intimately related through what he calls the quantum interactive dualism model. According to Dr. Stapp's theory, consciousness is the mechanism by which quantum possibilities collapse into actual reality, and this consciousness-mediated collapse process operates non-locally, connecting all conscious minds at the quantum level through what might be called a quantum consciousness field. If Dr. Stapp's theory is correct, then mind reading wouldn't just be possible, it would be a fundamental feature of how consciousness operates in a quantum universe. Every conscious mind would be quantum entangled with every other conscious mind, creating a vast network of telepathic connections that operates beneath the surface of ordinary awareness and allows information to flow instantly between any minds in the network, regardless of their physical location or separation. This quantum telepathy network would explain why certain thoughts, ideas, and innovations seem to emerge simultaneously in multiple minds around the world, even when the people involved have no contact with each other and are working independently on the same problems. The phenomenon of multiple discovery, where different people in different locations make the same discoveries or inventions at nearly the same time, might be evidence of quantum telepathic connections that allow innovative ideas to spread instantly through the collective consciousness of humanity via quantum entanglement effects. The quantum consciousness theory also suggests that the strength of telepathic connections between minds might be related to the degree of quantum entanglement that exists between them. Minds that have had significant emotional interactions, shared experiences, or mutual focus might become more deeply quantum entangled, creating stronger and more reliable telepathic channels that allow for more detailed and accurate mind-reading abilities. This would explain why telepathic experiences are most common and most accurate between people who are emotionally close to each other. The shared experiences, emotional bonds, and mutual focus that characterize close relationships might create deeper quantum entanglement between the minds involved, making telepathic communication more natural, accessible, and detailed than it would be between strangers or people who have no emotional connection. The quantum entanglement model also suggests that telepathic abilities might be developed and strengthened through practices that enhance quantum coherence in the brain and increase the degree of entanglement between minds. Meditation, synchronized breathing, shared intention, and other consciousness practices that create coherent brain states might enhance quantum entanglement effects and make telepathic communication more accessible and reliable. Allow yourself to drift even deeper as we explore what it might feel like to become conscious of the quantum telepathic network that may already be connecting your mind to every other mind in the universe through invisible quantum entanglement that operate outside the normal boundaries of space and time. Imagine your consciousness as a point of light in an infinite web of interconnected lights, each representing a conscious being somewhere in the universe, and all connected through quantum entanglement effects that allow information to flow instantly between any points in the network. The evidence for widespread mind reading becomes even more compelling and undeniable when we examine the phenomenon of collective consciousness, events where large groups of people seem to share thoughts, emotions, and intentions simultaneously without any conscious coordination or communication. These events have been documented throughout history, from religious revivals and political movements to spontaneous mass behaviors that emerge without any organized planning, and they suggest that human consciousness operates as a collective system that can synchronize and coordinate the mental activity of millions of individuals simultaneously. Dr. Roger Nelson, director of the Global Consciousness Project at Princeton University, has been studying collective consciousness events for over 20 years, using a worldwide network of random number generators placed in locations around the globe. These sophisticated machines, which normally produce completely random sequences of numbers with no patterns or predictability, begin to show highly significant non-random patterns during events that capture the attention and emotion of large numbers of people simultaneously. The Global Consciousness Project operates a network of over 100 random event generators distributed across all continents, continuously producing random data that is collected and analyzed by computers at Princeton University. Under normal circumstances, the output from these machines is completely random, with no correlations between different generators and no patterns that extend beyond what statistical chance would predict. During events like the September 11th attacks, the death of Princess Diana, major natural disasters, significant sporting events, and other occurrences that create strong emotional responses in millions of people, the random number generators around the world begin to produce patterns that are statistically impossible if consciousness weren't somehow influencing them. The effect is so consistent and so statistically significant that it cannot be explained by chance, equipment malfunction, or any known physical phenomenon. The statistical analysis shows deviations from randomness that would occur by chance less than once in millions of trials, with the magnitude of the deviation correlating with the emotional intensity and global reach of the triggering events. The more people who are emotionally affected by an event, and the stronger their emotional response, the greater the deviation from randomness in the global network of random event generators. The effect suggests that when millions of minds focus on the same event simultaneously, they create a collective consciousness field that can influence physical systems on a global scale, demonstrating that consciousness has the power to affect reality in measurable ways when enough minds are synchronized and focused on the same target. The implications are staggering. If human consciousness can collectively influence random physical processes around the world, then the power of focused collective awareness might be far greater than anyone has previously imagined. But what makes this research most relevant to our exploration of mind reading is Dr. Nelson's discovery that these collective consciousness effects often begin before the triggering events actually occur. During the September 11th attacks, for example, the random number generators began showing unusual patterns several hours before the attacks took place, suggesting that the collective unconscious of humanity somehow sensed the impending tragedy before it happened and began responding to it telepathically before anyone had conscious knowledge of what was about to occur. This precognitive aspect of collective consciousness events suggests that the telepathic network connecting human minds might operate outside of normal time constraints, allowing access to information about future events as well as present ones. If the collective human consciousness can sense major events before they occur, then individual telepathic abilities might also include precognitive elements that provide access to future information. The precognitive effects documented by the Global Consciousness Project indicate that major events cast shadows backward through time, creating subtle but measurable influences on consciousness and physical systems before the events actually manifest in physical reality. This suggests that the future might influence the present through consciousness mechanisms that operate outside the normal flow of causation, allowing sensitive individuals and collective consciousness networks to detect upcoming events through telepathic precognition. If human consciousness operates as a collective telepathic network that transcends space and time, then mind reading might include the ability to access not only what people are thinking right now, but also what they will be thinking in the future and what they have thought in the past. The entire timeline of human thought and experience might be accessible to sufficiently sensitive telepathic receivers, creating the possibility of accessing information from any mind at any point in history. The Global Consciousness Project data also reveals that collective consciousness effects are strongest during events that involve shared emotional responses across cultural and geographical boundaries. The natural disasters, terrorist attacks, and other tragedies that evoke universal human emotions of compassion, fear, and solidarity create stronger effects than events that primarily affect specific populations or cultural groups. This suggests that the telepathic connections between minds might be strongest at the level of basic human emotions and experiences that transcend cultural differences. Love, fear, compassion, and hope might create more direct telepathic links than intellectual concepts or cultural beliefs, indicating that emotional telepathy might be more fundamental and widespread than cognitive telepathy. The collective consciousness research also indicates that positive events can create measurable effects in the global consciousness field, though they tend to be less dramatic than the effects created by tragedies and crises. Celebrations, festivals, and moments of collective joy and unity create subtle but detectable patterns in the random number generator network, suggesting that collective happiness and celebration can synchronize human consciousness just as effectively as collective trauma and grief. The implications extend beyond scientific curiosity to practical applications for human cooperation and social harmony. If collective consciousness effects can be measured and monitored, they might provide early warning systems for social unrest, political instability, and other collective psychological phenomena. Understanding how collective consciousness operates might also reveal methods for enhancing human cooperation, empathy, and mutual understanding through practices that strengthen telepathic connections between minds. This possibility is supported by reports from many advanced meditation practitioners, psychic researchers, and individuals who have had spontaneous mystical experiences, who describe accessing what they call the Akashic records, a supposed cosmic library that contains all thoughts, emotions, and experiences that have ever occurred throughout the history of consciousness. While this concept might sound like mystical fantasy to materialist scientists, it becomes more plausible and scientifically reasonable when viewed through the lens of quantum consciousness theory and collective telepathic networks operating through morphic fields. If consciousness operates quantum mechanically, and all minds are quantum entangled through universal consciousness fields, then every thought that has ever been thought might remain accessible within the quantum field of collective consciousness, preserved forever in the morphic fields created by each mental event. Advanced telepathic abilities might involve learning to navigate this vast library of mental information, accessing thoughts and experiences from any mind at any point in time throughout the entire history of consciousness. Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo astronaut who became a consciousness researcher after his transformative experience of cosmic consciousness during his moon mission, they spent decades studying these expanded forms of telepathic ability and developing theoretical frameworks for understanding how consciousness might access non-local information from quantum fields that transcend the normal limitations of space and time. Mitchell developed what he called quantum holography as a theoretical framework for understanding how consciousness might access non-local information from the quantum field of universal consciousness. According to Dr. Mitchell's theory, which combines insights from quantum physics, holographic theory, and consciousness research, consciousness operates like a holographic system where every part contains information about the whole, and where information can be accessed instantly from any point in the system regardless of spatial or temporal distance. In a holographic system, each fragment contains the complete information of the entire hologram, encoded in interference patterns that can be decoded to reconstruct the whole from any part. If consciousness operates holographically, then each individual mind would contain encoded information about all other minds and all other experiences within the collective consciousness field, making it theoretically possible for any individual to access any information that has ever existed in the consciousness network. This means that individual minds, while appearing separate and isolated, actually contain information about all other minds and all other experiences within the collective consciousness field. The holographic nature of consciousness would make it possible for any individual mind to access information from any other mind or any other point in the history of consciousness. But most people lack the skills or awareness needed to access and decode this holographic information effectively. According to Dr. Mitchell's theory, advanced telepathic ability would involve learning to access and decode the holographic information that's constantly available in the quantum consciousness field. This information wouldn't come in the form of clear verbal messages or obvious images, but would be encoded in holographic patterns that contain multiple layers of meaning and require sophisticated interpretation skills to decode accurately. The holographic model explains why telepathic information often comes in symbolic, metaphorical, or imagistic form rather than as clear literal communications. When consciousness accesses holographic information from the quantum field, it receives compressed data patterns that contain vast amounts of information encoded in symbolic form. The receiving mind must then decode these patterns using intuitive and creative interpretation processes that can extract meaning from complex symbolic representations. Dr. Mitchell's research suggested that the holographic nature of consciousness explains why telepathic information often comes in the form of symbols, metaphors, images, and impressions rather than clear literal messages. The mind receiving telepathic information has to decode holographic patterns that contain complete experiential information compressed into symbolic form. Similar to how a hologram contains a complete three-dimensional image encoded in seemingly random patterns of light interference that only become meaningful when viewed from the correct perspective with the proper decoding mechanism. This holographic model of telepathy suggests that everyone has access to the complete library of human thought and experience. But most people lack the skills needed to decode the holographic information effectively and consciously. Developing telepathic abilities might be more about learning to interpret the symbolic and imagistic language of holographic consciousness than about developing some special psychic sensitivity or supernatural power that only a few people possess. The holographic consciousness model also explains why telepathic abilities seem to be enhanced during altered states of consciousness, such as meditation, dreams, and the transitional states between waking and sleeping. These altered states might allow the brain to shift into holographic processing modes that make telepathic information more accessible and easier to decode. While the normal analytical thinking processes that dominate waking consciousness might actually interfere with the reception and interpretation of holographic telepathic information, the analytical mind tends to process information sequentially and literally, expecting clear logical relationships and explicit communications. But holographic information is encoded in complex patterns that contain multiple layers of meaning simultaneously, requiring intuitive and creative processing abilities that can work with ambiguity, symbolism, and non-linear relationships. The shift from analytical to holographic processing modes might be essential for accessing telepathic information effectively. Advanced practitioners of meditation and other consciousness disciplines often report that their most profound insights and telepathic experiences occur when analytical thinking becomes quiet and intuitive awareness becomes dominant. This shift in consciousness processing modes might represent the transition from sequential linear thinking to holographic pattern recognition that makes telepathic information accessible. The holographic model suggests that developing telepathic abilities involves learning to quiet analytical thinking and enhance pattern recognition capabilities that can decode complex symbolic information. Instead of trying to force telepathic information into linear verbal formats, skilled telepathic receivers learn to work with images, symbols, feelings, and intuitive impressions that carry information in compressed holographic formats. As you drift deeper into the liminal space between waking and sleeping, your own consciousness might be naturally shifting into the holographic mode that makes telepathic information more accessible and easier to receive. The strange images, symbols, and impressions that flow through your awareness as you relax might not be random mental noise or meaningless dream imagery, but actual telepathic communications encoded in holographic form, carrying information from other minds that your consciousness is decoding and integrating into your own stream of awareness. The transition between waking and sleeping consciousness has long been recognized by researchers and practitioners as a time when psychic abilities are enhanced and telepathic communication becomes more accessible. Who gave thousands of psychic readings while in trance states and demonstrated remarkable telepathic abilities that were verified by independent investigation. He always accessed his telepathic abilities during the hypnagogic state between waking and sleeping, when his conscious mind was quiet but his awareness was still active and receptive. Similarly, many of the most successful remote viewers in government and academic research programs report that their abilities are strongest when they're in deeply relaxed, the dream-like states of consciousness where analytical thinking is suspended and intuitive awareness is enhanced. The brain states associated with deep relaxation and the onset of sleep seem to be naturally optimized for telepathic communication and the reception of non-local information from the quantum consciousness field. This suggests that the brain states you're entering right now as you drift towards sleep might be the optimal conditions for accessing telepathic information and experiencing direct mind-to-mind communication. As your brainwaves slow from the beta frequencies of normal waking consciousness to the alpha, theta, and delta frequencies of deep relaxation and sleep, your mind might be tuning into telepathic frequencies that are normally drowned out by the noise of ordinary analytical thinking. The research of Dr. Michael Persinger at Laurentian University supports this possibility through his groundbreaking studies of the relationship between brain electromagnetic activity and telepathic experiences. Persinger has found that telepathic experiences are most likely to occur when the brain's temporal lobes are in specific electromagnetic states associated with deep relaxation, altered consciousness, and the enhancement of what he calls anomalous experiences that transcend normal sensory perception. By using precisely controlled electromagnetic stimulation to artificially create these optimal brain states, Persinger has been able to enhance telepathic abilities in laboratory subjects, demonstrating that telepathic communication can be facilitated and enhanced through the manipulation of brain electromagnetic fields. His research suggests that telepathic communication might operate through electromagnetic mechanisms that are naturally optimized during certain brain states, but which can also be artificially induced and enhanced through technological intervention. Dr. Persinger's research suggests that telepathic communication might operate through electromagnetic fields generated by the brain during specific states of consciousness. When brains are in the right electromagnetic state, they might be able to detect and decode the electromagnetic patterns generated by other brains, even across considerable distances, creating a form of biological radio communication that operates below the threshold of conscious awareness, but which can be detected and measured using sophisticated scientific instruments. The electromagnetic theory of telepathy proposes that the brain generates complex electromagnetic fields during its normal operation, and that these fields carry information about thoughts, emotions, and mental states that can be detected and decoded by other brains that are in receptive electromagnetic states. The electromagnetic fields generated by brain activity extend beyond the skull and can be measured at distances of several feet using sensitive electromagnetic detectors, suggesting that they might carry information that other brains can access. This electromagnetic theory of telepathy would explain many of the reported characteristics of mind-reading experiences that have been documented by researchers around the world. It would explain why telepathy is enhanced during relaxed states when brain electromagnetic activity is more coherent and synchronized, why emotional content seems to be transmitted more easily than abstract intellectual information, and why some people seem to be natural telepathic receivers, while others have difficulty accessing these abilities. The electromagnetic model suggests that successful telepathic communication requires synchronization of electromagnetic states between the transmitting and receiving brains. When two brains achieve similar electromagnetic patterns, they might be able to share information through electromagnetic resonance effects, with the electromagnetic field of one brain inducing corresponding patterns in the electromagnetic field of the other brain. If telepathy operates through brain electromagnetic fields, then developing mind-reading abilities might involve learning to consciously control and optimize your brain's electromagnetic states through meditation, biofeedback, and neurofeedback, and other consciousness training techniques that help synchronize brainwave patterns and enhance the coherence of brain electromagnetic activity. The more coherent and synchronized your brain electromagnetic fields become, the more sensitive you might become to the electromagnetic signals generated by other brains, and the more accurate your telepathic reception abilities might become. The electromagnetic theory also suggests that environmental electromagnetic fields might interfere with or enhance telepathic communication, depending on their frequency, the intensity and coherence characteristics. The increasing prevalence of electronic devices, cell phone towers, Wi-Fi networks, and other sources of electromagnetic radiation in modern environments might be disrupting the natural telepathic communication channels that humans evolved to use over thousands of years of development. As a social species that relied heavily on nonverbal communication and intuitive social coordination. This could explain why many people report that their intuitive and telepathic abilities seem to be stronger in natural environments away from urban electromagnetic pollution, where the background electromagnetic noise is lower and the natural electromagnetic fields of the Earth and atmosphere are more prominent. The constant background of artificial electromagnetic noise in modern urban environments might be jamming the subtle electromagnetic signals that carry telepathic information between minds, making it more difficult for people to access their natural telepathic abilities. However, some researchers have suggested that human consciousness might be adapting to these new electromagnetic conditions in ways that we don't fully understand yet. The digital generation, which has grown up surrounded by electronic devices and artificial electromagnetic fields, might be developing new forms of telepathic sensitivity that can operate effectively in highly electromagnetic environments, or might be learning to use electronic devices as amplifiers and facilitators for telepathic communication rather than as obstacles to it. The convergence of biological and technological electromagnetic systems might be creating hybrid forms of consciousness that combine natural telepathic abilities with electronic communication technologies, resulting in enhanced telepathic capabilities that exceed what either biological or technological systems could achieve alone. But perhaps human consciousness is already adapting to these new electromagnetic conditions in ways that we don't fully understand yet. The digital generation, the which has grown up surrounded by electronic devices and artificial electromagnetic fields, might be developing new forms of telepathic sensitivity that can operate effectively in highly electromagnetic environments, or might be learning to use electronic devices as amplifiers and facilitators for telepathic communication rather than as obstacles to it. Some researchers have suggested that the constant use of electronic communication devices, cell phones, computers, social media platforms, instant messaging systems, might actually be training human consciousness to operate more telepathically by making instant, global communication seem normal and expected. The instantaneous, the global communication that these devices provide might be preparing our minds for direct telepathic communication that operates even more instantaneously and globally than current electronic technologies. The convergence of human consciousness with digital technology might not be replacing telepathic abilities, but rather enhancing and amplifying them in ways that create new possibilities for mind-to-mind communication. As human minds become more accustomed to instant, a global communication through electronic networks, they might be developing greater facility with instant, a global communication through consciousness networks that operate through quantum entanglement and morphic resonance, rather than through physical electromagnetic signals. This technological enhancement of telepathic abilities might explain why reports of synchronicity, telepathic experiences, and psychic phenomena seem to be increasing dramatically in the digital age, especially among young people who have grown up with constant connectivity and instant communication. Rather than technology suppressing human psychic abilities, it might be catalyzing their development and making them more accessible to larger numbers of people by creating cultural and psychological conditions that support the development of telepathic consciousness. The integration of human consciousness with digital networks might also be creating new forms of collective telepathy that operate through technological intermediaries, where social media platforms, search engines, and artificial intelligence systems serve as technological extensions of the collective human consciousness, amplifying and organizing the telepathic information flow between minds in ways that make mind reading more accessible and more accurate than it would be through purely biological mechanisms. From this perspective, the global internet might not just be a technological network for sharing information between computers, but might actually be the technological manifestation of the telepathic network that has always connected human minds at the quantum level. The World Wide Web might be humanity's unconscious attempt to create an external reflection of the web of consciousness that connects all minds through quantum entanglement and morphic resonance, making visible and accessible the telepathic connections that have always existed, but which were previously invisible and unconscious. Social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram might be serving as training grounds for telepathic communication, teaching people to share their thoughts and feelings instantly with large networks of connected individuals. The constant sharing of personal information, emotional states, and immediate reactions through social media might be preparing human consciousness for telepathic communication, where thoughts and emotions are automatically shared between connected minds without the need for technological intermediaries. The phenomenon of viral content spreading rapidly through social media networks might be a technological analog of how thoughts and ideas spread through telepathic networks via morphic resonance. When millions of people share similar thoughts or emotional responses to the same content, they might be creating morphic fields that make similar thoughts and responses more likely to arise in other minds, using social media platforms as amplification systems for natural telepathic communication processes. The artificial intelligence systems that can analyze vast amounts of human communication data might be becoming capable of detecting and mapping the telepathic patterns that flow through electronic networks, identifying the subtle correlations and synchronicities that indicate when minds are communicating telepathically through technological intermediaries. These AI systems might eventually serve as translators and amplifiers for human telepathic communication, making mind reading as accessible and reliable as current electronic communication technologies. The development of brain-computer interfaces that allow direct neural connection to electronic networks represents the next stage in the integration of human consciousness with digital technology. When human brains can interface directly with global computer networks, receiving and transmitting information through direct neural connections, the distinction between individual consciousness and collective digital consciousness might disappear entirely. But even without advanced brain-computer interfaces, the evidence suggests that mind reading might already be operating more extensively than most people realize through the integration of consciousness with current digital technologies. The constant stream of information that flows through social media, email, text messages, and other digital communication channels might be carrying telepathic information alongside the explicit digital content, creating hybrid technological telepathic communication that combines electronic and consciousness-based information transfer. When you feel compelled to check your phone just before receiving a message, when you think of someone just before they contact you through social media, when you have dreams or intuitions about information that later appears in your digital feeds, when you experience synchronicities that seem to be coordinated through electronic communication systems, you might be experiencing technologically mediated telepathy that operates through the integration of consciousness with digital networks. The algorithms that control social media feeds and search engine results might be unconsciously designed to enhance telepathic communication by presenting information that resonates with users' unspoken thoughts and interests. When artificial intelligence systems successfully predict what content users will find engaging, they might be detecting and responding to telepathic information about users' mental states and desires that exists in the data patterns created by billions of human interactions with digital systems. The phenomenon of echo chambers in social media, where users are presented with information that confirms their existing beliefs and interests. There might be a technological manifestation of telepathic resonance effects, where minds that share similar thoughts and beliefs naturally connect and reinforce each other through both technological and consciousness-based mechanisms. The increasing sophistication of personalized content recommendation systems might reflect the development of technological telepathy, where artificial intelligence systems become capable of reading human thoughts and desires directly from the data patterns created by digital communication and interaction. As these systems become more advanced, they might evolve into direct mind-reading technologies that can access human thoughts without requiring explicit communication through keyboards, screens, or other interface devices. The boundaries between mind reading and digital communication, between telepathic networks and technological networks, between individual consciousness and collective artificial intelligence, might be dissolving as human consciousness evolves to integrate more fully with the technological environment we've created. This evolution of consciousness might be happening so gradually and naturally that most people don't notice it occurring. Like fish who don't notice the water they swim in because it's become so fundamental to their existence that they can't imagine existence without it. But the effects might be profound and far-reaching, fundamentally transforming the nature of human experience and social organization in ways that we're only beginning to understand. As mind reading becomes more technologically mediated and collectively accessible, the entire structure of human society might need to adapt to a reality where thoughts, intentions, and information can be shared instantly between any minds connected to the global technological telepathic network. Privacy, secrecy, deception, and individual autonomy, concepts that have been fundamental to human civilization for thousands of years, might become obsolete in a world where minds can read each other directly through technologically amplified telepathic networks. The transformation might be as revolutionary as the development of language itself, creating entirely new forms of human consciousness and social organization that we can barely imagine from our current perspective. The transition might already be underway in ways that are subtle but significant, reshaping human consciousness and social relationships in ways that prepare us for a more telepathically connected future. The increasing transparency of personal information through social media, the growing acceptance of constant surveillance and monitoring, the declining expectation of privacy in digital environments, all of these trends might be preparing human consciousness for a reality where mental privacy no longer exists and where transparency and authenticity become the only viable strategies for social interaction. Young people who have grown up with constant digital connectivity might be naturally adapting to a more telepathic form of consciousness, where thoughts, emotions, and experiences are routinely shared and accessible to others through technological mediation. They might be developing new forms of individual identity that can maintain coherence and authenticity even in an environment of complete mental transparency, and new forms of social interaction that assume constant connectivity and shared awareness rather than privacy and individual autonomy. The generational divide over digital privacy and social media might actually represent a divide between those who are adapting to telepathic consciousness and those who are trying to preserve the older model of private, individual consciousness. Older generations who grew up with expectations of mental privacy might find the constant sharing and transparency of digital communication threatening and unnatural, while younger generations might find privacy and secrecy to be artificial and unnecessary barriers to authentic communication and relationship. The older generation's resistance to social media oversharing and digital surveillance might reflect not just concerns about privacy and security, but an intuitive recognition that these technologies are fundamentally altering the nature of human consciousness in ways that make traditional forms of individual privacy impossible to maintain. The generational conflict over digital privacy might be a surface manifestation of a deeper evolutionary transition toward telepathic consciousness that is occurring whether we consciously choose it or not. Educational systems that emphasize individual achievement, competition, and intellectual property rights might be preparing students for a world that no longer exists, while failing to prepare them for a telepathic future where collective intelligence, shared creativity, and collaborative problem-solving become the dominant modes of human activity. The current emphasis on preventing plagiarism and maintaining individual intellectual ownership might be counterproductive in a world where ideas naturally flow between minds through telepathic channels. Business models based on information scarcity, intellectual property protection, and competitive advantage through secret knowledge might become obsolete in a telepathic economy, where information flows freely between minds and competitive advantage comes from collaborative intelligence rather than private knowledge. Companies that adapt to collective intelligence models and open information sharing might have significant advantages over those that try to maintain traditional secrecy-based business strategies. Political systems based on representative democracy and private voting might need to evolve toward more direct and transparent forms of collective decision, making that account for the telepathic sharing of thoughts and intentions between citizens. When political leaders' real thoughts and motivations become accessible to voters through telepathic channels, the entire nature of political communication and representation might change fundamentally. Legal systems based on individual rights, private property, and the assumption that thoughts and intentions can be hidden might need to be completely restructured to account for a reality where mental states are transparent and accessible to others. Concepts like privacy rights, mental property, and individual culpability might need to be redefined in a world where the boundaries between individual minds become permeable and fluid. The transformation toward telepathic consciousness might require humanity to develop entirely new ethical frameworks that can guide behavior in a world where thoughts and intentions are transparent to others. Traditional ethical systems based on the assumption of private thought and hidden motivation might be inadequate for a reality where mental transparency makes deception impossible and requires higher standards of mental discipline and emotional responsibility. Religious and spiritual traditions might need to evolve new understandings of individual identity, soul, and spiritual development that account for the interconnected nature of telepathic consciousness. Concepts of individual salvation, personal spiritual achievement, and separate souls might be replaced by understanding of collective spiritual evolution and shared consciousness development that includes all beings in a unified spiritual process. The development of telepathic consciousness might represent humanity's natural evolutionary progression toward a more mature and integrated form of awareness that transcends the limitations of individual identity, while preserving the unique perspectives and contributions that individual consciousness brings to the collective. Instead of losing individuality in a homogenized collective consciousness, telepathic humans might achieve a form of unity in diversity that enhances both individual creativity and collective intelligence. The transition might be challenging and sometimes uncomfortable, requiring individuals to release old assumptions about privacy, control, and individual autonomy while learning to navigate the responsibilities and opportunities that come with shared consciousness and collective awareness. But it might also be the most liberating and empowering development in human history, freeing humanity from the isolation, misunderstanding, and conflict that have characterized human existence for millennia. As you continue to drift deeper towards sleep, your consciousness naturally expanding beyond the boundaries of individual identity and connecting with the vast network of awareness that includes every conscious being in the universe. Consider what it might mean to live in a world where mind reading is not only possible, but normal and expected. Would you be willing to give up the privacy of your thoughts in exchange for the deep empathy and understanding that complete mental transparency might provide? Would you be willing to merge your individual consciousness with a collective telepathic network that includes all of humanity and perhaps all conscious beings throughout the universe? These questions might not be theoretical much longer. The evidence we've explored tonight suggests that mind reading might already be happening on a much larger scale than most people realize. Operating through quantum consciousness effects, morphic resonance, electromagnetic brain communication, mirror neuron systems, and technological amplification of natural telepathic abilities. The technological and consciousness evolution currently underway might soon make telepathic communication as normal and accessible as verbal communication is today. The environmental factors that influence telepathic abilities have been largely overlooked by mainstream science. But researchers who study psychic phenomena have identified several conditions that seem to enhance or inhibit mind-reading capabilities. Natural environments, particularly those with minimal electromagnetic interference from human technology, appear to provide optimal conditions for telepathic communication. Many people report that their intuitive abilities are stronger when they're in forests, near bodies of water, or in mountainous regions far from urban areas. The Earth's natural electromagnetic field, known as the Schumann resonance, oscillates at approximately 7.8 Hz, which corresponds closely to the theta brainwave frequency associated with deep meditation, creativity, and enhanced psychic abilities. Some researchers suggest that the natural electromagnetic environment of the Earth might provide a carrier wave that facilitates telepathic communication between minds, and that artificial electromagnetic fields from technology might interfere with this natural communication channel. The urban environments with high levels of electromagnetic pollution from cell towers, Wi-Fi networks, power lines, and electronic devices might create interference patterns that make it more difficult for sensitive individuals to access their natural telepathic abilities. The constant background of electromagnetic noise might mask the subtle signals that carry telepathic information between minds, similar to how radio static can interfere with clear radio reception. However, some researchers have noted that younger generations who have grown up in highly electromagnetic environments seem to be developing different forms of psychic sensitivity that can operate effectively despite technological interference. Instead of being hindered by electromagnetic pollution, these individuals might be learning to use technological fields as amplifiers for their telepathic abilities, creating hybrid technological-biological communication systems. Cultural factors also play a significant role in the development and expression of telepathic abilities. The societies that acknowledge and value psychic phenomena tend to produce more individuals who develop and use these abilities consciously, while cultures that dismiss or discourage psychic experiences tend to suppress the development of telepathic skills even when the underlying capacity exists. Indigenous cultures around the world have traditionally maintained practices and beliefs that support the development of telepathic communication. Shamanic traditions, in particular, include extensive training in telepathic communication with both human and non-human consciousness, viewing these abilities as natural and essential aspects of human potential rather than as supernatural anomalies. Western scientific materialism, by contrast, has created cultural conditions that actively discourage the development of telepathic abilities by dismissing psychic experiences as imagination, coincidence, or pathology. The scientific establishment's rejection of consciousness-related phenomena has created a cultural atmosphere where people learn to ignore or suppress their natural telepathic experiences rather than developing and refining these abilities. Educational systems that emphasize rational, analytical thinking while dismissing intuitive and experiential ways of knowing might be systematically training people to suppress their natural telepathic abilities. The emphasis on objective, measurable, and reproducible phenomena in scientific education might be creating minds that are skilled at analytical thinking but poor at accessing the intuitive and receptive states of consciousness that facilitate telepathic communication. Religious and spiritual traditions have historically provided frameworks for understanding and developing telepathic abilities. But the decline of traditional spirituality in modern secular societies might have removed important cultural supports for psychic development. Without cultural validation and guidance for telepathic experiences, many people might dismiss their psychic experiences as meaningless or seek medical treatment for what they consider to be pathological symptoms. The increasing interest in meditation, mindfulness, and consciousness exploration in recent decades might represent a cultural shift toward greater acceptance and development of telepathic abilities. As more people engage in practices that enhance intuitive awareness and receptive states of consciousness, the cultural conditions for widespread telepathic development might be improving. Social media and digital communication technologies might be creating new cultural contexts that support the development of telepathic abilities by normalizing the global communication and shared consciousness experiences. The constant connectivity and information sharing that characterize digital culture might be preparing human consciousness for direct telepathic communication by making shared awareness and collective intelligence seem natural and desirable. The phenomenon of viral information spreading rapidly through social networks might be training human consciousness to participate in collective thought processes that resemble telepathic communication. When millions of people simultaneously share similar thoughts, emotions, and reactions to the same content, they might be engaging in technologically mediated forms of collective telepathy that prepare them for direct mind-to-mind communication. The artistic and creative communities often report high levels of telepathic experience, possibly because creative work requires the receptive, intuitive states of consciousness that facilitate telepathic communication. The collaborative nature of many creative projects might also create conditions that enhance telepathic connections between participants, leading to shared inspiration and synchronized creative insights. The transformation might be irreversible and unstoppable, driven by the same evolutionary forces that led to the development of language, art, technology, and every other major advance in human consciousness and capability. Just as previous generations couldn't imagine life with global electronic communication, current generations might not be able to imagine life with global telepathic communication, but they might not have a choice in the matter, because the evolution toward telepathic consciousness might be as inevitable as any other evolutionary development. The key might be learning to distinguish between your own thoughts and the telepathic impressions you receive from others, while also recognizing that this distinction itself might be somewhat artificial in a reality where all minds are fundamentally connected through universal consciousness fields. In a truly telepathic reality, the question might not be, whose thought is this? But rather, how can this thought serve the highest good of all consciousness? Developing telepathic sensitivity begins with cultivating greater awareness of the subtle impressions, feelings, and images that flow through your consciousness throughout the day. Instead of dismissing these experiences as imagination or random mental noise, you can begin to pay attention to them as potentially meaningful information that might be coming from other minds or from the universal consciousness field that connects all awareness. The first step is learning to quiet the analytical mind and enhance receptive awareness through meditation, mindfulness practices, or simply spending time in relaxed, the non-focused states of consciousness. When the constant chatter of analytical thinking becomes quiet, the subtle impressions that carry telepathic information become more noticeable and accessible. Regular meditation practice creates optimal brain states for telepathic reception by synchronizing brainwaves, enhancing electromagnetic coherence, and strengthening the neural networks associated with intuitive and receptive awareness. Even brief periods of daily meditation can significantly enhance sensitivity to telepathic impressions and improve the ability to distinguish between personal thoughts and information received from other minds. Spending time in natural environments away from electromagnetic interference can also enhance telepathic sensitivity by reducing the background noise that might mask subtle telepathic signals. Many people find that their intuitive abilities are stronger when they're near water, in forests, or in mountainous areas where the natural electromagnetic environment is less disturbed by technological interference. Developing emotional sensitivity and empathy naturally enhances telepathic abilities, because emotional content appears to be transmitted more easily than abstract intellectual information through telepathic channels. People who are naturally empathic and emotionally sensitive often discover that they have strong telepathic abilities once they learn to recognize and interpret their empathic impressions as potential telepathic information. Keeping a journal of intuitive impressions, unusual coincidences, and potential telepathic experiences can help you identify patterns and develop greater confidence in your ability to receive telepathic information. By recording these experiences and later verifying their accuracy when possible, you can begin to distinguish between accurate telepathic impressions and random mental activity. Working with a partner or group can accelerate the development of telepathic abilities by providing immediate feedback about the accuracy of telepathic impressions and creating supportive conditions for telepathic experiments. Simple exercises like trying to sense what card a partner is looking at, guessing who is calling before answering the phone, or attempting to receive images or words that a partner is thinking about can provide valuable practice and validation. The development of telepathic abilities seems to be enhanced by emotional bonding and mutual trust between participants. Couples, family members, and close friends often show stronger telepathic connections than strangers, suggesting that emotional bonds create more direct channels for telepathic communication. Building trust and emotional connection with practice partners can significantly improve telepathic accuracy and reliability. Learning to work with symbols, images, and impressions rather than expecting clear verbal messages is essential for developing telepathic abilities. Telepathic information often comes in the form of visual images, emotional impressions, physical sensations, or symbolic representations that require creative interpretation rather than literal understanding. Developing artistic and creative abilities can enhance telepathic sensitivity because creative work involves accessing the same intuitive and receptive states of consciousness that facilitate telepathic communication. Many artists, writers, and musicians report receiving creative inspiration through processes that resemble telepathic communication with sources of creativity that seem to exist beyond their individual consciousness. Regular practice with divination systems like tarot cards, runes, or I Ching can help develop the pattern recognition and symbolic interpretation skills that are essential for telepathic communication. These systems provide structured frameworks for accessing intuitive information and can serve as training tools for developing telepathic abilities. Understanding that telepathic abilities are natural human capacities rather than supernatural powers can help overcome limiting beliefs and cultural conditioning that might interfere with psychic development. Approaching telepathy as a natural extension of normal human communication abilities, rather than as something mysterious or otherworldly, can make these abilities more accessible and less intimidating. It's important to maintain realistic expectations and understand that telepathic abilities develop gradually over time with consistent practice. Most people don't become skilled telepathic communicators overnight, but with patience and regular practice, the most individuals can develop at least some degree of telepathic sensitivity and ability. The ethical use of telepathic abilities is crucial for their healthy development. Telepathic abilities should be used for positive purposes such as enhancing empathy, improving communication, and serving the highest good of all involved. Using telepathic abilities to manipulate, control, or harm others can create negative consequences that interfere with the healthy development of these capacities. Working with a qualified teacher or mentor who has experience with telepathic development can provide valuable guidance and help avoid common pitfalls in psychic development. The many spiritual traditions and consciousness research organizations offer training programs for developing telepathic and other psychic abilities in safe and ethical ways. The collective consciousness of humanity might be evolving toward a new form of shared awareness that transcends individual minds, while still preserving the unique perspectives and experiences that make individual consciousness valuable and meaningful. The telepathic network of the future might be like a vast orchestra, where individual minds contribute their unique instruments to a collective symphony of consciousness that is far more beautiful, complex, and capable than any individual mind could create alone. But this evolution requires a fundamental shift in how we understand the nature of mind, identity, consciousness, and the relationship between individual and collective awareness. Instead of seeing consciousness as something that individual brains produce and own, we might need to recognize consciousness as a shared field that individual brains participate in and contribute to, but don't exclusively control or possess. The implications of widespread telepathic ability would fundamentally transform every aspect of human society, beginning with our concepts of privacy and individual rights. In a world where thoughts can be read directly by others, the entire legal framework, based on private thoughts and hidden motivations, would need to be completely reconstructed. Criminal justice systems that rely on concealed evidence, hidden motives, and the ability of perpetrators to lie about their actions would be revolutionized by telepathic law enforcement capabilities. When investigators can directly access the thoughts and memories of suspects, witnesses, and victims, the process of determining guilt or innocence would become dramatically more accurate and efficient. However, This transparency would also raise profound questions about mental privacy rights and the ethics of involuntary thought access. Society would need to develop new legal frameworks that balance the benefits of telepathic crime solving with protections for individual mental autonomy and the right to private thought. The business and economic systems based on information asymmetry, trade secrets, and competitive advantage through hidden knowledge would be completely transformed by telepathic transparency. When business partners can read each other's thoughts during negotiations, the entire nature of commercial relationships would shift toward greater honesty and collaboration. The financial markets that depend on insider information and hidden knowledge would need to adapt to conditions where relevant information is automatically shared between market participants through telepathic channels. This might lead to more efficient and fair markets, but would also require new forms of regulation and oversight to prevent telepathic market manipulation. Employment relationships would be fundamentally altered when employers can assess the true thoughts, motivations, and capabilities of employees and job candidates. While this might lead to better job matching and more authentic work relationships, it would also raise concerns about mental privacy in the workplace and the potential for telepathic discrimination. Educational systems would be revolutionized by telepathic communication between teachers and students. Direct mind-to-mind knowledge transfer could make learning dramatically more efficient and effective, but would also require new approaches to assessment, the individual development, and the cultivation of independent thinking skills. Political systems based on representative democracy and private voting would face fundamental challenges in a telepathic society. When voters can directly access the true thoughts and intentions of political candidates, the entire nature of political communication and campaign strategies would change dramatically. The concept of propaganda and political deception would become impossible in a world where political leaders' real thoughts and motivations are accessible to voters. This could lead to more honest and effective governance, but might also create new challenges for political leadership and decision-making in complex situations that require strategic thinking and negotiation. International relations and diplomacy would be transformed when negotiators from different countries can read each other's thoughts during treaty negotiations and peace talks. While this might lead to more honest and effective international agreements, it could also complicate diplomatic strategies that require confidentiality and strategic ambiguity. The marriage and family relationships would be profoundly affected by telepathic communication between partners and family members. The ability to directly share thoughts and emotions could lead to unprecedented levels of intimacy and understanding, but would also require new skills for managing conflict and maintaining healthy boundaries in relationships. The child rearing would be transformed when parents can directly access their children's thoughts and emotional states. This could enable more responsive and effective parenting, but would also raise questions about children's right to mental privacy and the development of individual identity in a telepathic family environment. The social relationships in general would shift toward greater authenticity and transparency when superficial social interactions are replaced by direct sharing of thoughts and feelings. The social masks and personas that people typically maintain in casual social interactions would become impossible to maintain, requiring new forms of social etiquette and emotional maturity. Mental health treatment would be revolutionized when therapists can directly access their clients' thoughts and emotional states. This could make psychological healing much more efficient and effective, but would also require new ethical frameworks for therapeutic relationships and client consent. Religious and spiritual communities would need to develop new understandings of individual soul, spiritual development, and the relationship between personal and collective spiritual growth. Traditional concepts of individual salvation and personal spiritual achievement might be replaced by understanding of collective spiritual evolution that includes all beings. The arts and creative expression would be transformed when artists can directly share their creative visions and emotional states with their audiences. This could lead to new forms of artistic expression and appreciation, but might also change the nature of individual creative achievement and artistic ownership. Scientific research would be accelerated when researchers can directly share their insights, observations, and intuitive hunches with colleagues. The collaborative research could become much more efficient, and effective when team members can communicate directly through telepathic channels. But new ethical frameworks would be needed to ensure fair credit and recognition for discoveries. The transformation toward telepathic society would require the development of entirely new social institutions and cultural norms that can function effectively in conditions of mental transparency. These institutions would need to balance the benefits of telepathic communication with protections for individual autonomy and the right to mental privacy when needed. Society would need to develop new forms of mental discipline and emotional maturity that enable individuals to function effectively in telepathic communities. The people would need to learn to manage their thoughts and emotions more consciously, knowing that their mental states might be accessible to others. The transition period toward full telepathic society might be particularly challenging, as some individuals develop telepathic abilities while others remain mentally private. This could create new forms of inequality and social tension between those who can participate in telepathic communication and those who cannot. This shift in understanding might be the key to navigating the transition to a telepathic future with wisdom, grace, and benefit for all conscious beings. By recognizing that individual minds are already intimately connected through consciousness fields, quantum entanglement, morphic resonance, and technologically mediated networks, we can begin to prepare for a world where these connections become conscious, accessible, and intentionally utilized for the highest good of all. The development of mind-reading abilities might not require special training, psychic gifts, or supernatural powers, but simply greater awareness of the telepathic connections that already exist and greater skill in recognizing and interpreting the telepathic information that's constantly flowing between minds. By paying attention to your intuitive impressions about others, by noticing the synchronicities and meaningful coincidences that occur in your life, by recognizing the ways that your thoughts and emotions are influenced by the people around you, you might discover that you're already participating in telepathic communication far more than you realized. As you drift into sleep tonight, you're entering the optimal state for telepathic communication and the reception of information from other minds and from the universal consciousness field that connects all awareness. The transition between waking and sleeping consciousness creates ideal conditions for telepathic experiences because the analytical mind becomes quiet while receptive awareness remains active and open to subtle impressions and influences. Sleep research has consistently shown that the hypnagogic state, the transitional period between waking and sleeping, is characterized by unique brainwave patterns that combine the receptive alpha and theta frequencies associated with meditation and deep relaxation with the creative and intuitive qualities of dream consciousness. During this transition period, the brain's normal filtering mechanisms are relaxed, allowing greater access to information and influences that are normally excluded from conscious awareness. Many of history's most successful psychics and telepathic communicators have reported that their abilities are strongest during the hypnagogic state. Edgar Cayce, who demonstrated remarkable telepathic and clairvoyant abilities in thousands of documented readings, always accessed his psychic abilities during the transition into sleep. Similarly, many successful remote viewers report that their most accurate perceptions occur when they're in deeply relaxed, dreamlike states of consciousness. The brainwave patterns that occur during the onset of sleep appear to be naturally optimized for telepathic communication. As your brainwaves slow from the beta frequencies of normal waking consciousness to the alpha, theta, and delta frequencies of deep relaxation and sleep, your mind becomes more sensitive to the subtle electromagnetic fields and quantum information that might carry telepathic signals between minds. During sleep, the brain's default mode network, the collection of brain regions that maintain self-awareness and personal identity during waking consciousness, becomes less active, allowing consciousness to expand beyond the normal boundaries of individual identity. This expansion of awareness might make it easier to access information from other minds and from the collective consciousness field that connects all aware beings. Dream telepathy has been studied extensively by researchers who have found consistent evidence that people can receive telepathic information during sleep. In controlled laboratory experiments, researchers have attempted to telepathically transmit images, words, or concepts to sleeping subjects, who then report dreams that contain the transmitted information with accuracy rates far above chance. The most successful dream telepathy experiments involve emotionally connected pairs of participants who have strong personal bonds, or who spend time developing rapport and mutual focus before the telepathic transmission attempts. This suggests that emotional connections create stronger telepathic channels that remain active even during sleep, allowing for more reliable and accurate information transfer. A dream telepathy appears to work most effectively when the transmitted information has strong emotional content or personal significance for the receiving dreamer. Abstract or neutral information is less likely to be successfully transmitted through dream telepathy channels, while emotionally charged images, personal concerns, or information relevant to the dreamer's life circumstances is more easily received and integrated into dream content. Many people report spontaneous telepathic dreams involving family members, close friends, or romantic partners, often receiving accurate information about the other person's emotional state, activities, or circumstances without any normal means of communication. These spontaneous dream telepathy experiences often occur during times of emotional intensity or crisis, when the telepathic connections between minds might be naturally enhanced. The symbolic and metaphorical language of dreams appears to be particularly well suited for telepathic communication, as telepathic information often comes in the form of images, symbols, and impressions rather than clear verbal messages. The dream state's natural ability to work with symbolic information might make it an ideal medium for receiving and processing telepathic communications. As you continue to drift deeper towards sleep, your own consciousness is naturally shifting into the receptive state that makes telepathic communication more accessible. The thoughts, images, and impressions that flow through your awareness as you relax might include telepathic information from other minds, mixed seamlessly with your own mental activity in ways that make it difficult to distinguish between internal and external sources of information. The boundary between your individual consciousness and the universal consciousness field becomes more permeable during sleep, allowing greater access to the collective memory and intelligence that includes all the thoughts and experiences that have ever existed. Your dreams tonight might include not only personal psychological material, but also information from other minds and from the vast library of consciousness that exists in the morphic fields and quantum information systems that connect all awareness. Your sleeping mind might serve as a receiver for telepathic communications from loved ones who are thinking about you, from people who need your help or support, or from the collective consciousness of humanity as it evolves toward greater telepathic connectivity and shared awareness. The dreams you have tonight might carry important information, guidance, or insights that come from sources beyond your individual knowledge and experience. Allow your consciousness to expand beyond the boundaries of your individual mind and connect with the vast network of awareness that includes every conscious being in the universe. Feel yourself connecting to the quantum telepathic network that operates through entanglement effects, morphic resonance, and electromagnetic brain communication. Notice how your thoughts, emotions, and intentions ripple out through this network, affecting others in subtle but real ways, while simultaneously receiving impressions and influences from the collective field of consciousness. The future of human consciousness might include abilities that would seem miraculous from our current perspective: direct mind-to-mind communication, access to collective knowledge and wisdom, empathic connection with all living beings, and conscious participation in the creative evolution of reality itself. But these abilities might not be supernatural gifts granted to a chosen few, but rather natural capacities that emerge as consciousness evolves and recognizes its own interconnected nature. The evolution toward telepathic consciousness might represent humanity's natural progression toward a more mature and integrated form of awareness that transcends the limitations of individual identity, while preserving the unique perspectives and contributions that individual consciousness brings to the collective whole. Instead of losing individuality in a homogenized group mind, the telepathic humans might achieve a form of unity in diversity that enhances both individual creativity and collective intelligence. This evolutionary transition might be guided by the same principles that have driven biological evolution: the development of greater complexity, integration, and adaptive capability over time. Just as biological evolution has produced increasingly sophisticated nervous systems capable of more complex information processing and behavioral responses, The consciousness evolution might be developing more sophisticated telepathic and collective awareness capabilities that enable more effective cooperation and problem-solving. The emergence of global communication technologies, artificial intelligence systems, and worldwide social networks might be preparing humanity for direct telepathic communication by creating cultural and psychological conditions that support shared awareness and collective intelligence. The experience of instant global communication through electronic networks might be training human consciousness to expect and utilize direct mind-to-mind communication that operates even more efficiently than technological systems. Artificial intelligence development might play a crucial role in facilitating the evolution toward telepathic consciousness by creating technological systems that can detect, analyze, and amplify the telepathic communications that already occur between human minds. AI systems with access to vast databases of human communication and behavior might be able to identify the patterns and correlations that indicate telepathic information transfer, making these processes more visible and accessible to conscious awareness. Brain-computer interfaces that allow direct neural connection to electronic networks might serve as bridges between individual human consciousness and collective artificial intelligence, creating hybrid systems that combine biological telepathic abilities with technological information processing capabilities. These hybrid systems might represent the next stage in consciousness evolution, where the boundaries between biological and artificial intelligence become increasingly permeable and collaborative. The development of telepathic consciousness might also be catalyzed by global challenges that require unprecedented levels of human cooperation and collective intelligence to solve effectively. The climate change, resource depletion, population growth, and other planetary-scale problems might create evolutionary pressure toward the development of collective awareness and telepathic communication capabilities that enable more effective global coordination and decision-making. Crisis situations often trigger enhanced telepathic abilities, as we've seen in the research on crisis telepathy between emotionally connected individuals. Similarly, a global crisis might trigger the emergence of collective telepathic awareness that allows humanity to function as a more integrated and intelligent planetary consciousness capable of addressing challenges that exceed the problem-solving capacity of fragmented individual minds. The emergence of telepathic consciousness might be accompanied by the development of new forms of ethics and morality that account for the interconnected nature of telepathic awareness. Traditional ethical systems based on individual rights and separate interests might be replaced by ethical frameworks that recognize the fundamental unity of consciousness and the shared responsibility that comes with telepathic interconnection. In a telepathic society, the golden rule of treating others as you would want to be treated might become a practical necessity rather than just a moral ideal, because the thoughts and emotions you direct toward others would directly affect your own consciousness through telepathic feedback loops. Negative thoughts and harmful intentions would create telepathic pollution that would contaminate the shared consciousness field and ultimately return to affect the originator. The conversely, positive thoughts, loving intentions, and service to the collective good would create beneficial influences in the telepathic network that would enhance the consciousness and well-being of all participants. The development of telepathic abilities might naturally lead to more ethical and compassionate behavior because individuals would directly experience the consequences of their mental and emotional activity on others. Educational systems in a telepathic society might focus on developing emotional intelligence, empathic sensitivity, and collective problem-solving skills rather than emphasizing individual achievement and competition. Students might learn to participate in group consciousness processes where multiple minds work together to solve complex problems that exceed the capabilities of individual intelligence. The arts and creative expression might be revolutionized by direct sharing of creative visions and inspiration between artists and their audiences. New forms of collaborative creativity might emerge where multiple minds contribute to the same creative work, producing artistic expressions that transcend the limitations of individual imagination and skill. Scientific research might be accelerated by direct sharing of insights, the observations and intuitive hunches between researchers around the world. Complex scientific problems might be solved through collective intelligence processes where thousands of minds contribute to the same research questions simultaneously. the accessing solutions that no individual researcher could discover alone. Spiritual and religious traditions might evolve toward recognition of consciousness unity and shared spiritual development rather than emphasizing individual salvation and personal spiritual achievement. The direct experience of telepathic connection might provide empirical evidence for the interconnected nature of all consciousness, supporting spiritual teachings about unity and oneness that were previously matters of faith rather than direct experience. The transition toward telepathic consciousness might require humanity to develop new forms of mental discipline and emotional maturity that enable individuals to function effectively in telepathic communities. The people would need to learn to manage their thoughts and emotions more consciously, knowing that their mental states directly affect others through telepathic channels. This increased mental responsibility might lead to the development of more sophisticated consciousness training programs that teach individuals how to maintain positive mental states, manage negative emotions constructively, and contribute beneficially to the collective consciousness field. Meditation, mindfulness, and other consciousness disciplines might become essential life skills rather than optional spiritual practices. The evolution toward telepathic consciousness might also require the development of new social institutions and governance systems that can function effectively in conditions of mental transparency and shared awareness. Democratic processes might evolve toward more direct and immediate forms of collective decision, making that account for the telepathic sharing of thoughts and intentions between citizens. In your dreams tonight, you might find yourself experiencing direct telepathic communication with other minds, accessing information and perspectives that transcend your individual knowledge and experience. That these dream telepathy experiences might be preparing you for the waking reality of conscious telepathic communication that humanity seems to be evolving toward, helping you develop the skills and awareness needed to navigate a more telepathically connected world. The dreams you experience as you sleep might serve as a practice ground for the telepathic abilities that are naturally emerging in human consciousness. During sleep, when the analytical mind is quiet and the brain's normal filtering mechanisms are relaxed, you might access telepathic channels that are normally blocked or ignored during waking consciousness. Your sleeping mind might receive visits from the consciousness of loved ones who are thinking about you, the messages from guides or teachers who exist in non-physical dimensions, or information from the collective unconscious of humanity as it evolves toward greater awareness and connectivity. These experiences might seem like ordinary dreams, but they could actually be telepathic communications disguised in the symbolic language of dream consciousness. As you drift deeper into sleep, allow yourself to remain open and receptive to whatever information, guidance, or experiences might come to you through telepathic channels. Don't try to control or direct the process, but simply maintain an attitude of gentle curiosity and willingness to receive whatever is offered to your consciousness during this time of expanded awareness. The information you receive through telepathic dreams might not always come in clear, literal forms. More often, telepathic communications arrive as symbols, images, emotions, or intuitive knowings that require creative interpretation to understand their meaning and significance. The symbolic language of dreams appears to be the natural medium for telepathic communication, allowing complex information to be transmitted efficiently between minds. Some of the thoughts and feelings that flow through your consciousness as you sleep might not originate from your own mind, but might be telepathic impressions from other minds that are broadcast through the universal consciousness field that connects all aware beings. Your individual consciousness might serve as both a receiver and transmitter in this vast network of mental communication, contributing your own thoughts and experiences while simultaneously accessing the thoughts and experiences of others. The boundary between your individual consciousness and the collective consciousness of humanity becomes more permeable during sleep, allowing you to participate more directly in the shared mental activity that is constantly occurring beneath the surface of ordinary awareness. Your dreams might include not only personal psychological material, but also collective themes, archetypal symbols, and universal concerns that reflect the current state of human consciousness evolution. Mind reading might already be happening all around us, in every moment of empathy. Every flash of intuition, every meaningful coincidence, every technological connection that brings minds together across space and time. We might be living in the early stages of humanity's transition to conscious telepathic communication, the learning to navigate the possibilities and responsibilities that come with shared mental transparency and collective consciousness. The transformation might be challenging and sometimes uncomfortable, requiring us to release old assumptions about privacy, individuality, and the nature of consciousness itself. But it might also be the most wonderful and liberating development in human history, freeing us from the isolation and misunderstanding that have characterized human existence for so long, and allowing us to experience the deep connection and unity that might be our true nature as conscious beings. As you surrender to sleep, recognize that you are participating in one of the most significant evolutionary transitions in the history of consciousness. The telepathic abilities that are emerging in human awareness represent not just individual psychic gifts, but the dawning of a new form of collective intelligence that could transform every aspect of human civilization. Your individual consciousness is both a unique and valuable perspective on reality, and also an integral part of the vast network of awareness that includes every conscious being in the universe. The thoughts you think, the emotions you feel, and the intentions you hold contribute to the collective mental atmosphere that influences the consciousness and experience of everyone else. This understanding brings both great responsibility and great opportunity. Every moment offers you the choice to contribute positive, loving, and constructive influences to the telepathic network of human consciousness, or to add negative, fearful, and destructive elements to the collective mental environment. The quality of your mental and emotional life directly affects not only your personal experience, but also the consciousness and well-being of every other person you're connected to through telepathic channels. The future that humanity is evolving toward might include forms of communication, cooperation, and collective intelligence that seem impossible from our current perspective. But these capabilities might be natural expressions of consciousness potential that has always existed, but has been suppressed or ignored by cultures that emphasize individual separation rather than collective unity. The technological developments that are reshaping human communication and social organization might be preparing us for even more direct forms of consciousness connection that operate without any technological intermediaries. The internet, social media, and artificial intelligence might be transitional technologies that help human consciousness adapt to direct telepathic communication that requires no external devices or systems. The young people who are growing up with constant digital connectivity might be naturally developing the psychological and neurological adaptations that will allow them to participate consciously in telepathic networks. Their comfort with shared awareness, instant communication, and collective intelligence might prepare them to be the first generation of consciously telepathic humans. The scientific research we've explored tonight provides compelling evidence that consciousness is far more interconnected and powerful than mainstream science has acknowledged. From quantum entanglement effects in brain microtubules to morphic resonance between minds, from electromagnetic communication between brains to the influence of collective consciousness on physical systems, the accumulated evidence points toward a reality where mind reading is not only possible but inevitable. But perhaps the most important insight from our exploration is that you don't need to wait for future developments to begin experiencing telepathic communication. The abilities are already present in your consciousness, waiting to be recognized, developed, and consciously utilized. By paying attention to your intuitive impressions, practicing receptive awareness, and opening yourself to the possibility of mental connection with others, you can begin to access the telepathic capabilities that are your natural birthright as a conscious being. The transformation of human consciousness toward telepathic awareness might happen gradually over many generations, or it might accelerate rapidly as more people recognize and develop their telepathic abilities. Either way, your individual participation in this evolution is important and valuable. Every moment that you choose to operate from love rather than fear, connection rather than separation, and service rather than selfishness, you contribute to the positive evolution of human consciousness. Sweet dreams, fellow traveler in consciousness. May your sleep be filled with beautiful telepathic connections, and may you wake tomorrow with greater awareness of the magnificent network of mind that you are always and already a part of. The future of human consciousness is being written in every moment, through every thought, through every connection between mind and mind. And you are both author and character in this unfolding story of collective awakening. And remember, if tonight's exploration of consciousness mysteries has opened your mind to new possibilities, share your own experiences with unexplained mental connections in the comments below. Your stories contribute to our collective understanding of these phenomena and help build the community of awareness that makes telepathic evolution possible. Subscribe and hit that notification bell to join thousands of other consciousness explorers who are discovering that the boundaries between minds are far more fluid than we ever imagined. Together, we are awakening to the reality that mind reading isn't coming in the future. It's already here, operating all around us every moment of every day, waiting for us to develop the awareness and skills needed to recognize it, embrace it, and use it for the highest good of all conscious beings. The telepathic future of humanity is not a distant possibility, but a present reality that we're only beginning to understand and consciously participate in. Your consciousness is both infinitely valuable as a unique perspective on reality, and intimately connected to every other conscious being through the universal field of awareness that underlies all existence. Rest now in the knowing that you are far more than your individual identity, and that your dreams tonight will be another step in the magnificent journey of conscious evolution that is transforming humanity and perhaps all of existence itself.